Steve's on the line, and Steve, we are ready for you to start us off, and you've got till 12:30, then we're going to break, and I think that's when you need to go as well.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Alex. Okay, so appreciate the opportunity to talk about competitiveness and what I'm going to focus in on and how it is a critical component of a viable climate plan, and talk about some of the competitive levers that are available to make a material difference in this area. Before I go there, though, I was going to set the context with some work that is being done with the provincial government in BC around a low-carbon industrial strategy. And the low-carbon industrial strategy is a joint initiative between the province of BC and the BC Business Council to work collaboratively to unlock BC's full economic potential to transition to a low-carbon economy and establish BC as a world leader in supplying low-carbon goods and services to a world that has a growing demand for low-carbon solutions. And the work that has been going on is relevant to my discussion here because one of the first things that we did over the last 12 months is look at the competitiveness of our resource industries, how we stacked up against our competitors in terms of cost and profit margin, and also to look at how we stack up against our competitors in terms of low carbon intensity products, in terms of the GHG advantage that we have in BC through producing lower carbon products than our competitors. So one of the things we looked at is in the terms of modeling competitiveness, we looked at both natural gas extraction and LNG, and the results of that were enlightening. On the natural gas extraction side, in our North Montney and our gas fields, we're 34% worse off in terms of profit margin to our main competitor, the U.S. That is a significant profit margin differential in terms of ensuring that we have a sustainable and viable industry. On the LNG front, I know Dave Linsky is going to talk about the LNG competitiveness in his presentation after lunch, so I'm not going to talk about that much. But the bottom line is, on that side, we are a high-cost producing jurisdiction. So in other words, on both the natural gas extraction and the LNG production, as it sits right now, we're not competitive compared to our competing jurisdictions. On the other side of that piece, we also modeled the GHG intensity of our products. And how did we basically, and this is product on product, so I'm not talking about displacement for coal-fired natural gas generation. I'm talking about product on product differential. And our natural gas extraction advantage ranges from 3.2 million tons to 6.3 million tons per year, depending on our production of gas, and that range of production was between 6 and 9 BCF a year. And also, it also depends on the extent of electrification of the production of our gas upstream. And LNG is about 3.6 million tons advantage on improved investment. So if you take a look at the overall GHG intensity advantage we have over our competing jurisdictions, it adds up to about 10 million tons per year. Just to give some context, that's 17% of BC's entire emissions profile. So one of the things that is clear from the work that we've done jointly with BC government is we're not competitive and we have GHG advantage. And the importance of this is that if we're not competitive, our LNG product obviously will never get to the market. And other higher GHG producing producers like the U.S. will. That'll result in higher global emissions, and it'll result in lower economic wealth generation in BC and a lower standard of living for the citizens of British Columbia. So this is what we call classic carbon leakage. And at this stage, BC is a poster child for carbon leakage. And this is not just for natural gas and LNG development, but this is across our entire resource sector, because we also looked at mining, forestry, aluminum smelting, and the elsewhere the same. We're not competitive yet because of our climate policies, because of our ability to have hydroelectric manufacturing. We are a low carbon producing sector for manufactured goods. So that's a little bit of context in terms of the competitiveness piece. And really now, I think I just wanted to switch a little bit to where we are in terms of timing. I think there's really 3 stages to addressing this problem. And I just wanted to frame those out, and then I'm going to start talking about some of the levers that are available to us to offset this competitiveness issue. I think in the short term, which is obviously where we are now, because carbon is not priced into the global market, in other words, there's no premium for low carbon products, and because there's an unequitable use of cost incentives to reduce emissions, i.e. most of our competing jurisdictions have no carbon tax or protect their industries from it or provide other incentives for competitiveness. This is a stage where we are right now where governments need to step up and play a role in offsetting the competitiveness gap. If not, we're not going to be in the game. And like I said, we'll talk about those levers in a few minutes. If you look at the midterm, carbon starts to get priced in the market. In other words, you start to get a premium for your low carbon goods, and you also start to get preferential market access. And at the same time, you could have other jurisdictions starting to catch up on climate policies that incent lower emissions. And once those start to manifest themselves, governments can monitor this, and they can start to dial back these subsidies that are offsetting the competitiveness gap that I'm promoting that need to be in place right now. So these things aren't permanent. They are in place until the market actually starts to price carbon. You get a premium for the good, and you get a preferential market access. Then over the longer term, all going well, carbon is fully priced into the market. There's no government intervention needed. Any kind of offsetting tools or policies or subsidies that have been in place can be dialed back completely, and incentives for low carbon products are fully built into the market price, and access to the market is dependent on you producing a low carbon product. Industries are fully incented to find further emissions reductions, which promotes innovation, promotes technology, and you have a very solid system where you're going to start to ensure that you are dealing with climate in an appropriate way. So the message here, from my perspective, is if you're not competitive at the front end in the short term, where we are right now, you're not going to be a player over the long term. Other jurisdictions will, because there's economies of scale that need to be built up in order for you to, for BC to be in the game in terms of the LNG industry. So in terms of competitiveness, what are the short-term levers that government needs to utilize to ensure that we have a successful low-carbon LNG sector? There's a number of them, and I'm just going to go through them fairly quickly, and then maybe open it up for a few questions before my time's up. So the first element, I think, that's available in terms of a lever is trade protection from carbon tax for energy-intensive and trade-exposed industries. It's interesting that BC is an outlier in this area in that it is the only jurisdiction in the world that has an emissions trading system that does not provide protection from carbon tax or equivalent protection for its trade-exposed industries. So you think about even California, one of the world's leading jurisdictions with an emissions trading system and dealing with climate, fully protects their trade-exposed industries from carbon tax, because they understand if they don't, then they will not get their low-carbon products into the marketplace and will not have an outsized impact on global emissions. So right now, the federal government actually recognizes this. So if outside of BC, the federal government program has recognized this problem and has initiated a federal system known as the federal backstop that provides provides a minimum of 80% protection against the carbon tax for energy-intensive trade-exposed industries, and it goes up to 90% for some industries. And the irony of this is that for every province except for BC, including Alberta, who's fighting the carbon tax and is not moving forward, or if they are, they're doing it reluctantly, has protection against the carbon tax for their trade-exposed industries, and industry is better off in terms of their competitiveness because of that. So this is one area that we feel very strongly that needs to be addressed in British Columbia, and is an effective lever in terms of closing the gap on competitiveness. And I think that if you take a look at the Conference Board of Canada, they just came up with a report called Tipping the Scales that recognizes that unless we provide some protection to our trade-exposed industries nationally, if we didn't do that, we'd be losing up to $10 billion a year and 50,000 jobs. So it's a really important element that needs to be done. It's done in the rest of the world. Right now, it is not done for the under 30 component of the carbon tax in British Columbia. So it's a lever that's available to government to look at. The second lever that is critically important for competitiveness is PST. PST is a very expensive tax for large capital investments. That is, as it is paid at many levels, and it is very regressive in terms of competitiveness. Obviously, ideally, moving to a value-added type tax system is the answer. But in the interim, PST relief exemptions are a lever that actually have been used and can be used to offset some of the competitiveness gap that currently exists on the natural gas and the LNG side. Another lever is capital write-off. And as it sits right now, we're not competitive with the U.S., where companies that spend major capital in these types of investments can write off 100% of their capital in the first year. In Canada, we have a multi-year declining balance system, which is not competitive. Now, this is a lever that's controlled by the federal government. There was some movement on it a couple of years ago, but as it sits right now, this is still a lever that we're an area where we're not competitive with our main competing jurisdiction. And so it's another area where available that would be able to help the competitiveness gap. The fourth one is a little bit more difficult to quantify, but is critically important, and that's regulatory efficiency and certainty. And right now, even though if you look at kind of the world rankings of regulatory effectiveness, and Canada ranks very high across a number of elements, so we are protecting our environment from a perspective of our regulatory system, but we have a cumbersome regulatory system, and as we can see, and this is playing out right now, is there's no certainty even once we have achieved success through our regulatory systems. Litigation, protest, all of those elements are leading to uncertainty, and this alone could be probably one of the single reasons that put future LNG establishment at risk. It's something we need to deal with. It's only going to work through, I think, a broader coalition across everybody. But the regulatory efficiency and certainty is a huge lever, and right now is not in a good place. The fifth lever is carbon offsets and trading. And again, BC is an outlier in this area in the fact that we are the only jurisdiction in the world without offsets and trading as a meaningful compliance tool for industry. And this creates a number of problems. From a competitiveness side, offsets are a competitiveness tool when an offset purchase is less than the current carbon tax, therefore creating a savings. But an offset system is also critical in terms of looking at nature-based solutions and other ways of kind of dealing with net zero in terms of achieving a net zero LNG. So it's critically important that we have an effective carbon offset and trading system in British Columbia, and currently we don't. The sixth lever is infrastructure, and our competitors have infrastructure in place for the most part. They have the pipelines, they have the transmission lines, they have the roads, the bridges, they have the marine terminals. So this is an area, again, where governments can play a role in terms of a lever in providing for infrastructure that is helping to offset some of the competitiveness gap that we have. So there are more levers, but I think those are what I would characterize as 6 main elements. I know Dave, as I said, is going to dive into more of the specific LNG competitiveness pieces and the world markets and that type of thing. But I think my kind of message is that we really need to get this right at the front end. Emissions reductions are hugely important, obviously, in any climate plan, and net zero is hugely important. But unless you have dealt with competitiveness, you are not going to get the investment in in this industry, and as a result, we're going to lose on both ends, because we have an opportunity to produce some of the lowest carbon intensity products in the world, and if we can't get our products to market, others will, and it's going to be critically important that we work together to encourage that competitiveness be dealt with in terms of the levers that are available to us, and really sit down and look at how we can make this piece work. So that, I think, Alex, is all I had to say, and I just wanted to make sure I left some time for a few minutes for questions, if there's any questions.
Thank you, Steve. Everybody was paying attention, I can tell you that. Here you go, Linda Cody.
Hey, Linda.
Hi, Steve. Can you just give us a little bit more color on your assumptions a price premium?
So, if we're going to have a price premium and market access are what is eventually needed in order for us to, be completely successful and not have to subsidize the competitiveness gap that we have. So price premium, simply put, would be, if you're producing LNG that has an intensity that's below 0.16, for instance, or any other benchmark you want to choose, you would be getting a better price in the marketplace for that particular product. And that would assume that on the other end, you're selling that product for a better price to your customers, because they are interested in obviously buying a low carbon product to ensure that we deal with climate change. On the market access side of it, this could be something as simple as, say for the Japanese LNG market, if they started with a regulation that would would insist that they had at least, say, 5% of their LNG imports be below a certain carbon intensity that we achieve because of our low carbon product, that would then give us also preferential market access. So those are the two elements in terms of premium and access that I think eventually are needed in order to build this fully into the marketplace, and then you start to move out of the need for governments to intervene in terms of incentives and offsetting competitiveness gaps.
Thanks, Steve. Other questions? Go ahead.
Hi, Steve. My name is Tom Pingshan. I'm with the LNG producer consulting, Rocket LNG, and my role is sell LNG to Asia, to Japan, China, or Korea, and I talk to the buyer on daily basis. So you just mentioned in Japan, the buyer may be interested in buying green LNG for premium, but based on my conversation with them, no one so far has shown any interest in paying extra cents for green LNG.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why I say this is a longer term play. I mean, right now, we're not there. We're not there in the short term, we're not there in the midterm, but longer term, that's where we need to get to. But you're right, I mean, that's certainly not happening right now, and that's why governments at this stage need to take a role in offsetting the competitiveness gap.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, it's David. I just wanted to add my 2 cents on that, and I agree with the previous comments that buyers in the market are absolutely not willing to pay a premium right now, but they do value a cleaner product because they recognize that helps them manage risk on their side, and they understand that helps reduce risk of a project also proceeding. So while they're not willing to pay a premium right now, they like a clean product, because it helps them manage their risk. And if you're competing against a project that is not clean, it may give you an edge in that way. So that's a nuanced sort of position. And hopefully over time, there will be counterparties that are looking for a clean product and willing to pay for it, but that just doesn't exist today.
So it's,
Exactly.
it's preferential access.
Hopefully. Yeah, no one has said we're choosing this because it's clean,
Right.
but buyers have said we like clean because it helps us manage risk. We think your project has a better chance of going forward, and we think that in our jurisdiction, people are going to appreciate having a product that is able to be demonstrated as being cleaner. Yeah.
David, and Steve, it's Mark Irwin here. We started to see that unfold in the marketplace last year when there were LNG contracts that were indexed to coal, and then there were other ones that were actually under the guise of net zero contracts per se as well. So you're starting to see the market evolve to reflect the desire for a cleaner product, but I agree with everything that's been said so far. There isn't a premium out there yet for this.
Yeah. Yeah, and so if there's no premium right now, then, we need to address offsetting some of the competitiveness gaps. Otherwise, as I mentioned, like we're just not going to get an LNG industry built in the short term.
Steve, Linda again, did you see that news release last week about the certification that Energeer and 7th Generation and Pembina have been working on? So do you see, I know you have a lot of experience in forest certification, do you see that kind of third-party assurance emerging here around a product like LNG?
Yeah, certification is one way to tackle this for sure, and the way this worked well in the forest industry, Linda, as you know, is that once the buyers then start to require certification, then you have a market access advantage, and certainly that could play a role, but there's also a lot of bumps along the way in terms of establishing a certification system. But yeah, I think that certification could play a role in terms of market access.
So if I interpret what you said correctly, short-term, mid-term, long-term, the message is not, and these are my words, net zero is too expensive.
No.
The message is you got to make net zero competitive in the short term and the medium term until such time as carbon's fully priced in the market and it's actually competitive because it's net zero. And
Exactly. Yeah.
And so then that's the case, and one of the strategies that you talked about was infrastructure, and the kind of high-level analysis that BC Hydro's done for us indicates that the infrastructure investment required on the electricity front, the transmission front, It's kind of $3 billion-ish. And those are big numbers, it's a big number. When you think about the big picture and rationalizing those kind of investments for, for a government or federal and provincial government, what's the rationale? What's the argument to say it seems like a lot of money, but we're positioning ourselves for competitiveness in the future and getting access now?
Yeah, I mean, government will always do general economic modeling against any policy initiative. The problem is there's a lag. So in other words, money needed up front, and the returns are often 5-10 years down the line when the plants are built, the jobs are in place, the taxes are being paid. So it does take long-term vision to implement short-term competitive measures, but the payback is definitely there, and the payback is in having people employed and general economic and GDP benefits that back into government revenue and allow for a more prosperous economy. It's just there is a lag.
Okay, thank you. I know you've only got about 2 more minutes, Steve. Any final questions?
What's going to happen next? Ask them that. How has the BC government responded to their plan?
Linda's just wondering what's going to happen next on the LCIS, right?
Good question. Which I won't answer.
Okay, well, Steve, thank you very much for your time today. Sorry you couldn't be here with us in person, but everybody was listening carefully and taking notes. So it was definitely worth your effort, and look forward to engaging with you further in the future.
Yeah, and if there is interest in diving into a bit more on the LCIS piece, there's quite a bit more technical information behind it. So that would be something you could follow up on if you were interested. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve.